Hello. Hello there. So good afternoon to you, dear brethren. Good morning to you. And good evening to you. Depends on the time you are joining us. It is brunch time on Maiyegun's Diary Political again. And this afternoon, we shall continue from where we stopped yesterday, from reading the historical piece, this book called Blood on the Niger, the untold story of the Nigerian Civil War. So if you have a copy of the book yourself, you can read along. It is published by Emma Okocha, and we started reading it from yesterday. So today we shall continue. So from chapter 5, yesterday, we were able to dig into what led to the creation of the Midwestern region, making it the fourth region of Nigeria in 1963, as well as the first coup and what led to that, called the revolution by those soldiers led by Kaduna Nzeogu. Then the breakout of war, as well as the casualties of war. So we have covered the path. The part where Kaduna Nzeogu himself was killed by the Nigerian troop, as well as the supposed civilian Igbos in the Midwest region at the time were also slaughtered, the retreating soldiers of Biafra, their atrocities, the looting, and so on. So we shall continue from chapter 5 again. You can listen to this pretty much like you are listening to a podcast. You can, just get on with your normal morning or lunch routine while you listen. And if you have the time to engage, great. Welcome aboard. Okay. Thank you so much for joining me. And I shall continue. Now we are at Asaba. Sorry, one sec. So we are now at Asaba, where Murtala Mohammed, that led the Nigerian troop in their counter attack, after the Biafran soldiers, led by Victor Banjo, that took over the Midwest region and on. So the atrocities continues. So this is the part of the dark side of Nigerian history that they would rather remains buried, especially for this younger generation from seeing through it, while the propaganda that has been, that have been spread for years, still kind of prominent and all that. So now chapter 5, because of our time. So the first part is a quote. So more houses and cities have perished at the hands of man than storms or earthquakes have ever destroyed. Right Honorable Lord Avebury, The Use of Life, December 1885. Quote. Now, Asaba was first capital. When there was no country called Nigeria, Asaba was the civil headquarters of the territory ruled by the Royal Niger Company, a British chartered company which ruled and traded in the area. Okocha, a town north of Asaba, which stands at the confluence of the River Niger and its principal tributary, the River Benue, was the military headquarters. That is why when the British Crown took over the control of the territory from the Royal Niger Company in January 1, 1900, the Jos Parks flag of the Royal Niger Company was lowered and the British Union Jack hoisted in its place at both Asaba and Lokoja. From 1886 AD to 1904, Asaba town was the provincial headquarters of the Royal Niger Company. And for those years, its political and commercial importance was at its zenith. The first attempt to plant Christianity in Asaba was by the Church Missionary Society. The Niger Mission landed at Asaba in 1875, and the Anglican Mission spread from there to the hinterland towns of Osomala and Oku. As intensified missionary operations followed in Aniocha, Ika areas down to Ogwachiuku, Ubuluku, Akuuku, Onitsha, Olono, Ezi, Idumuje, Ugboko, etc. The Catholic mission arrived in 1884 with the prefecture of the Upper Niger, the first vicarage ever to be created in Western Nigeria in 1918 under Catholic Bishop Thomas Broderick, was located at Asaba. Asaba was also headquarters of Our Lady of Apostle Convent, a flourishing large convent with boarding facilities to which girls from all parts of southern Nigeria flooded. It was, therefore, no accident that the first West African indigenous priest was from Asaba division. Father Paul Emechete of Ezi was on January 6, 1920, ordained in Asaba by Bishop Broderick. This compelling history of a town and a people produced the underlying factor that singled Asaba as a major strategic military and psychological objective of the federal troops after the fall of Benin. Strategically, Asaba stands astride the Trans-African Highway, which starts from Mombasa, linking both the eastern cities of Onitsha, Enugu, and Calabar to the western cities of Benin, Ibadan, and Lagos. This geopolitical significance of the town was equally embraced by the Biafrans. The fall of Asaba would mean the threat to Onitsha, the economic life wire of the young republic. The last stand of the Biafrans in the Midwest was, therefore, bloody and bitter. The tempo of that clash increased with the emergence of a mercurial militia officer who went on to establish himself as one of the greatest commanders of that war, Colonel Joe Achuzia, as the commander of the ragtag but spirited soldiers left behind to stop the 2nd Division's blaze, wanted to prove something. In his book, Requiem Biafra, his total commitment to battle was shown as he was taking up defensive position at St. Patrick's College, Asaba, in the face of federal advancing to the town. Mr. Augustine Odigwe, a Port Harcourt engineer, had brought him a lorry load of cutlasses. In quote, he told me that they had brought this to help arm the young men in the town who were not in the army so that they could help defend the town. I was so touched by this incident that I vowed that regardless of the odds, I would fight and give the federal troops something to remember. And if I failed to stop them, I would engage them on any other ground and theater of the war till the war ended. This promise I made to myself because the intensity of the mortaring and artillery shelling, which I experienced that evening in Asaba, my hometown, convinced me that this was a total war and not a police action. Elsewhere, Chuzia said, in quote, I went into my office and ordered the administrative staff, who had already packed, to move out to Onitsha, while I stayed behind, burning the documents that were left out. By 6 p.m., Colonel Unzudo and what was left of the troops who were doing rear guard fighting arrived. I saw that they were predominantly youth of Aniocha descent, namely Asaba, Ibuzo, Okpanam, and Ogwachiuku. I told Colonel Ozudo to leave for Onitsha and to take the soldiers with him. They turned around and addressed me in our native dialect. They said, Diopa, we will stay with you and fight. So Colonel Aneba Achuzia loses Asaba. So Colonel Achuzia's crushing defeat at Asaba was an overpowering motivation for his sadistic conduct throughout the war. It was clear that the Biafran entry into the Midwestern area, their forced retreat, and consequent abandonment of Western Igbos remained unforgettable by the Hannibal. When he immobilized the bridge, his primary concern was to stop the federal advance and save the Biafran nation. He did not foresee that the ominous obstacle, which for that moment saved the Biafran nation, caused disaster for his own people. As a result, many people who were on the bridge at the material time perished. Other escapees returned to face menacing brigands and a frustrated army that had been denied his march to its primary objective. One of those who could not make it across the bridge was Sidney Asiodu. Sidney, who burst the starters with the skyrocketing power of Ben Johnson while bracing the tape with the flamboyance of Jesse Owens, was in the 1960s an all-round athlete nicknamed the Igbo Bios for his athletic distinction in Igbo College, Lagos. Later, he read zoology on Zig Scholarship at the University of Nigeria, Nsukka. As an Olympian, he was in the Nigerian team for the 1964 Tokyo Olympics. His patriotism and commitment almost put his academic goals on the line. Indeed, on many occasions, he risked missing his examinations representing Nigeria either in the Olympics or the Commonwealth Games. He did that in Rome, 1960, and in Jamaica, 1965. Moreover, at the outbreak of the Civil War, Sidney was a visible dissident against the university's open support for secession. At the terraces of the stadium, the Potter's Lodge, and balcony of the Akpabio Hall, where he resided, he organized debating sessions and contributed forcefully on the implication and futility of secession. On October 7, 1967, Sidney Asiodu approached the bridge, but the bridge had been broken. Sidney ran back to his father's compound. At his Cable Point residence, he scribbled some lines in his diary, quote, "The shelling is getting out of hand. I'm afraid." Unknown to him, his brother, Chief P.C. Asiodu, one of Nigeria's most revered modernization economists and permanent secretary in General Gowon's cabinet, had sent a frantic message to the commander of the federal troops, the late Colonel Ibrahim Taiwo, imploring the commander to locate his brother by all means. Caged up in his father's compound, Sidney was later located by elements of the Federal Army, and together with his relatives were marched to the Marine Beach, shot and dumped into the Niger. Somewhere else, another great Nigerian athlete could not escape the slaughter. Joe Obiakwane, an athletic schoolboy with wide proficiency in tennis and football, was visibly afraid of the sound of battle. A peaceful, academically inclined youth, Joe had a very strict father. Hence, in this type of emergency, his decision must be taken for him. Joe, very well known in the East for his athletic prowess, wanted to cross over to his friends away from the flying bullets. Time was running out for Joe and family when from Lagos, a desperate colonel, Dr. Obiakwane, elder brother to Joe, telephoned from Ikoyi Military Hospital, ordering his younger brother to ignore Biafran propaganda and find his way to Lagos. He argued that Lagos was the safest area for him and the family. But the Obiakwane family was ruled and dominated by Pa Obiakpani, a colonial-oriented civil servant. Everybody waited for his decision. When he did, he decided for Asaba, adding that his family would have nothing to do with Biafra or Lagos. Joe dared not go counter to his father's ruling. When the soldiers came, Joseph Obiakpani, College of Immaculate Conception, academic prophet, and beloved sportsman, and the last born of the Obiakpanis was found in his toilet hideout, cut down by a blaze of rapid fire. The whole compound was later set ablaze. Until his death, Pa Obiakpani and his family never recovered from Joe's death. The master list. Just a stone's throw from Sidney Sasiodu's compound, my father, Ogwechi Onanyelugo Benedict Ikenye Okocha, with his nephew, Vincent Iweze, were being added out of his 38 Unebisi residence towards the river. The soldiers were brandishing a master list. My father, who spoke some Hausa, having worked all over the country as a civil servant, could not understand why a 63-year-old pensioner would be dehumanized and buffeted by soldiers that were supposedly fighting for national unity. All the soldiers said to him was that his name was on the list. Therefore, he was condemned. Faced with the inevitable, my father offered himself to the soldiers but pleaded for the lives of his nephew and son. Very soon, Vincent Iweze, former territorial controller, Northern Nigeria, and a confidant of the former Northern Nigerian Premier, Alhaji Ahmadu Bello, his son, Victor, a student of Immaculate Conception College, Benin, and my father were all added into a waiting van. My father was later separated from the Iwezes and dispatched into the river Niger. The river Niger turned crimson red. Blood was on the Niger. Vincent and Victor Iweze, clinging together, were later found in a pool of their own blood. Now, Captain Whiteman, no mercy. Nda, proprietor of the famous Nigerian Institute of Technology, Asaba, testified that his name was on the master list. In quotes, said, I did not join the procession, but was later caught up with some condemned group somewhere at Ibusa Road. Captain Whiteman, no mercy, was the officer who held us hostage. Suddenly, Major Taiwo emerged and demanded in Hausa why he was holding us. We are going to kill them, was his reply. The major lied to him that he had forgotten his map in his Land Rover and ordered him to go for the map. In his absence, Taiwo confessed, I came with them, I don't have control over them. You must run for your lives. That was the beginning of a race for survival that took me to Achala, Ibusa, and finally to Ishiagu. At Ibusa, the federal troops pursued us, and there one Jua was identified as a native of Asaba, and he was shot at Ibusa. At that time, Asaba people were like lepers. Nobody would welcome them without getting into trouble. At Ishiagu, I had a good reception. The Obi of Ishiagu was my friend since his election contest into the Midwest House of Chiefs. Even then at Ishiagu, every day saw me thinking about home. I was very sad. One day, I went into the market and bought a jackknife. When His Royal Highness, my host, heard that I had bought a knife, he thought I was going to commit suicide. Later, I went into the bush and returned with the first homemade chewing sticks ever to be introduced into the market. The chewing stick business involved the obese children, and in a few months, I was rich man again. Sometimes in March 1968, Mr. Unda traveled to Asaba to check on his family. He was in Asaba when the Biafran struck. The federal troops reacted with violence. At home in the village that had gradually settled down, following the atrocities of October 1967. March 2nd, 1968 was another sad day. Suddenly, Unda and 17 other men were lined up. The 5 soldiers on patrol needed to know who was Unda in that group. Nkwokulo Kwentua thought it was a money matter. He said, "If it is money, let's give you. Leave us alone. We are not Biafrans." It was hit very hard on the face, and their leader was ready to finish us off. "Oga, I beg, na slip of tongue." The sergeant promptly coughed and asked the poor man to open his mouth. He did, and he transferred vomit into the man's mouth. "Chop am, eat it," he commanded. Mr. Unda's reaction was, "Oh my God, oh my God." "Who said, oh my God?" thundered the sergeant. There was immediate silence. At that point, Major Joseph Meyer sent a Land Rover for Mr. Unda, but it was too late. The sergeant had few seconds before the arrival of the major, sent back his aide-de-camp, "Go and tell the brigade major that the man is dead." In fact, the major's boys had earlier made it into my compound and were confronted by those gangsters. He had therefore, on noticing how we were being humiliated, ran back to the brigade headquarters. They did not give away my name. Before the major could land the soldiers on the orders of the sergeant, had moved down my little daughter, Maiyegun, and my nephew, Ike. They were on the ground eating their lunch. Their orders were to fire any moving object in the house. They were coming back for us when the major alighted from his Land Rover. The sergeant and his men took their heels. Seconds later, they had killed Martin Igbeka in the next compound. The major made arrangements and sent Mr. Unda to Onichaoku, from where he went back to Ishiagu. With his experience at Asaba, he saw it coming for Ishiagu. He had been informed by his friends, and he warned the chief about the plan to attack Ishiagu by federal troops. This Royal Highness trusted his native doctors and was not bothered. Who will blame him? Before my own eyes, I had seen the Ezedibia, the king of wizards, singularly ward off a platoon of soldiers. They had come threatening everybody as it was their custom. The Ezedibia appeared at the square armed with a small fan. When he raised the fan, bees from surrounding orange trees attacked from the right. I saw this with my own eyes. The soldiers never returned. When the federal troops later attacked, they never gave Ishiagu or Ezedibia any chance or time to defend the town. It was a midnight operation, and they arrived with army lorries and forced the doors open. They separated men from their women, shot the men, and set the whole town afire. In fact, it was a new Ishiagu that developed after the war. The shield gums. One of the greatest ear-raising testimonies came from Gertrude Okogu, MD. As a teenage high school student, she was certain that what befell the Asaba people on the 7th day of October, 1967, has been stamped into her memory forever. As long as I live, nothing can wipe out that horror. The interview was taking place a few days after the second shock of our lifetime. Her husband, on the previous week, bled to death after a bloody encounter with armed robbers at Surulere, Lagos. Undeterred by Maiyegun sympathizers, Gertrude volunteered that most of the families around Cable Point and Umweze areas were forced at gunpoint to the police station, Killing Ground, on Unebisi Road, Asaba. My cousin, Gertrude, had dragged Joe's body all the way from Cable Point to Umonaje. My young uncle, Joe, had been shot in the leg and bled profusely. He did not want a punishing death He prayed the soldiers to end his agony. The soldiers obliged him and laid him still with more bursts of gunfire. Gertrude's loss of emotion and her stoic dragging around town of her uncle's body to the final resting place was as a result of the abominable atrocities the women of the town witnessed after the entry of federal troops into Asaba. Like many other women in town, it was their lot to bury their husbands, their brothers and children. Some bodies strewn on the pathways where the remains of babies hacked to death from the clutches of their helpless nursing mothers. At the police station, my mother instinctively spread her hands and attempted to gather in one spot all her children. She was calling on Jesus and obviously was in and out of hysteria. Suddenly, a boy, I knew him, was a student of St. Patrick's College, Asaba, was dragged out and mortally wounded. As he was writhing in agony, he cried, "Is this death? Is this how people die? Please, Mama, come and help me. Mama, Biano. Some people, help me." The officer in charge responded. He ordered a Mercedes 411 truck to run over the poor boy. The driver of that truck was chewing gum when he felt his tire crush the soft body parts of his fellow Nigerian. Again, nobody made any moves. Mothers and their children and a few morose men sat in rows of daylight stupor, unable to ascertain exactly what dream or horror film was in display. It was incredible to watch. My own young brothers abandoned my mother's protective nest for these soldiers. The soldiers received their young fans and in fact offered some of the gums they were chewing to my brothers. They subsequently took their time and answered all the questions about firing and rifle operations posed by my inquisitive brothers. I remember all the time that the soldiers chewed gums and were indeed smiling. The party over the women were separated from the men. It seemed there were very few men around. The soldiers therefore forcefully yanked from their mothers, students, and teenage boys and moved them to the men's side. Nobody made any moves. Not too long, the machine guns mounted during the shooting clinic, coupled for my brother's initiation, opened fire, and the condemned men and boys were grisly cut down. The surrounding soldiers were still chewing gum. They followed Asaba. So the search and destroy party in the Nigerian Army uniform was made of Midwesterners of Ishan, Benin, Yoruba, and the Jaw origins, testified Monsignor Uboko, rector at the Catholic Major Seminary at Ibadan. Asaba fell to the federal troops, they revealed, on the 5th of October, and the tall black soldiers who came in were a bit destructive. What happened from the 6th and 7th was unbelievable. His words: "I was at the parish compound when the federal troops when the federal troops came. Suddenly, the firing increased. People were running helter-skelter, and it was obvious that civilians were being shot at sight. One Nigerian soldier emerged and cried to me, 'Father, bless me. I am a Christian and I cannot participate.' With that recognition from a Yoruba Catholic, who later informed me that he got to know me when he attended one of my retreats at Ibadan. I was given respectability and posted some bodyguards. In the midst of firings, wailings of women, I gathered the Reverend Sisters, some seminarians, and headed with my bodyguards to Catholic maternity at Ogbogonogo. As we moved, I was gathering more men, women, and children. I was to make some more sorties with my bodyguards. In that vein, a lot of people were saved from instant death. The pattern of killings perpetrated by these soldiers on the 6th of October remained the same. In Cable Point areas, Any man found is made to show the heels of his feet, and is in most cases, before he did that, he was shot. Houses were searched, and the men were separated from their families and shot. The Federal Army later gave me the authority to set up a mint camp for fleeing civilians and seminarians. In that vein, I was able to save a lot of people. Mrs. Idigbe, who managed a small restaurant at the Cable Point area, remembered that on the 6th of October, on 6th day of October, she was able to recognize some Asaba never-do-wells who were known thieves, smugglers, and ex-convicts in the Nigerian Army uniform. This readily aligned with the Nigerian soldiers, pointing out to the invading soldiers' houses of important men suspected of having rebel sympathies or of collaborating with them. Mrs. Idigbe said, "We arrested in my restaurant, and my family, including my children, were ordered with orders to point out Osadebe's house. This was the system that led to the numerous cases of pillaging and burning down of people's houses in the Cable Point area of Asaba. I will not tell Osadebe's house. I am not a politician," was my reply. Mrs. Idigbe also noticed that the Nigerian soldiers were intrigued that natives could betray their brothers and joined in the looting of relations' property. The bewildered soldiers suddenly turned on those never-do-wells, otherwise known to the native as the Anonouns, exclaiming, "Brother, all of them are finished." And so the carnage continued. Elsewhere at the Ogbeausa settlements, the opposite name for Sabongari, residential quarters of stranger elements living amongst the Hausa states. A former teacher of 35 years experience tells his story, but before then, let us go back to the scenario at Ogbeausa the day Biafrans crossed the Niger. The Hausa settlement at the end of Cable Point is as old as Asaba Township. It developed during the trading boom of the Royal Niger Company, when trade on the Niger brought a lot of Nigerians together, buying, exchanging, and selling goods. Most of these stranger elements from the north of the Niger, namely the Hausas, Fulanis, Nupes, and Igalas, decided to stay put in Asaba. Many were born there and did not know their northern route, and during the crisis did not know where to run to. These were the Nigerians that a group of brigands from Onitsha fell upon on the morning of the 9th of August, 1967. These youth, mainly aggrieved refugees from the north, apparently have not forgotten the 1966 debacle in the north. In vengeance, they accompanied the Biafran brigade, and before the Asaba indigenes knew what was happening, a lot of damage had been done in Ogbeausa. Many were rescued and given safe conduct through Auchi by road, and others proceeded boat through the river Niger. This group never made it, for they were ambushed at Onono near Onitsha and dealt with. This was the antecedent as the federal troops now in command approached Ogbeausa quarters, Asaba. According to Mr. Okocha, many families huddled together inside locked houses. Though a native of Asaba, Mr. Okocha who preferred to live amongst the Hausa people, recounted his words. For days, my family and others were locked up following indiscriminate firing and hoping for the battle to subside. On the morning of the 6th, I opened my door and immediately was confronted by a soldier whose hand was on the trigger. It was apparent that my house has been under surveillance. He ordered me to move out. I told him I had families in my house and I needed to tell them I was fine. He ordered me to open the doors in the house. The males were separated from the women and children as we proceeded to Cable Point. There, we were ordered to sit down. Occasionally, a soldier would approach, pick one of the men sitting down, and shoot him. One Biosa had the picture of Colonel Odumegwu Ojukwu in his pocket. When he was searched and the picture discovered, I was unable to say immediately what I saw, for I knew what the result would mean to the unfortunate man. Just as the soldiers were getting impatient with me, one other young man identified Ojuku's picture, and before our eyes, Mr. Biosa was shot instantly. In our sitting position, I noticed towards evening that a prominent Asaba son was being escorted towards the marine beach by some soldiers. The Gloria Modi, a pensioned federal populations officer who served in many of Nigeria's populations counting exercises, fell onto the soldier's hands because he would not let go his car. That was his last fight, for when the soldiers returned from the beach, I did not see the tall, huge figure of T. Gloria Modi again. And again, Mr. Ben Obaka Okonji, principal of St. Patrick's College, Asaba, believes that what happened to the town following the entry of Nigerian troops was more than war. He lamented in his words, I was in the school when the bullets started landing. I had to move into the village. We were in the village when suddenly we saw very tall black soldiers emerged from nowhere. Immediately we were hounded out. Men separated from the women. My group of young men and middle-aged were divided into two other groups. Immediately, the NCO in charge ordered that the other group should be shot. About 12 young men were shot on the spot. Men who attempted to run and failed to obey orders were instantly shot. I escaped death miraculously. Just at the moment I was being marched to the famous Ogbe Osowa Center, Captain Ogbebo of the Nigerian Army came forward and rescued me. Captain Ogbebo was in my physics class many years ago at SPC, St. Patrick's College, by the way. So Okonji's fellow marchers were not as lucky. By the following day, they were part of the human piles in the street corners that put traffic in the town to a halt. Father Ugboko and others in the Red Cross at that point in time were concerned that an epidemic might break out in the town. According to the Monsignor, I thought Asaba had been wiped out. Off your shirts and your singlet. So before shooting into limelight, announcing the coup that toppled Major General Muhammadu Buhari, Dongoyaro as a name was already well known in Asaba. Dongoyaro was another commissioned officer in a hit squad that included Major Nasumu, Major Brodricks, Wifo, Captains Sokoto, and Musa Banana. Even though Majors Brodricks and Wifo and Captain Sokoto and Musa Banana were more bloodthirsty, these officers terrorized the women of Asaba and the Busa and did not care if the women in their custody were nursing mothers. In one memorable example, a cousin of the Okobis was in Ogbogo on a visit. He was not aware that Dongoyaro was interested in one of the Okobi beautiful sisters. A snarling Dongoyaro breezed in, thundering at the civilian intruder. Cocking his gun instantly, he bellowed, "Up your shirts and your singlet." The young man, who had escaped death a number of times, quickly pulled off his shirt and singlet. He was shaking and trembling like a jelly, transfixed and shaken to the marrows. The young man was saying his last prayers when he saw Dongoyaro release his safety, and the bullet came flying over his head to the roof of the house. Dongoyaro was amusing himself and sitting in a judgment of life or death before the helpless court of a beautiful young woman he was courting. Michael Osigbeme was Ishan. So at that time, it is very possible that a good number of non-natives lost their lives alongside the indigenes. In the first place, the federal soldiers were very impatient and would readily shoot at anybody who was explaining anything in spoken good English. They hated conversations and educated elites. for the reason that they were unable to communicate in English. There were many Ishans, Yorubas, Ijos, Igala, etc., with parents that had located in Asaba and were born in town. They could, as a result, speak very good Igbo, and most of the time spoke only that one language, Igbo. Another category were those non-Igbos who got married to Western Igbos and decided to leave the village and rented houses to live a city life in Asaba. Over the years, they were assimilated, and the family spoke and behaved and took to the Asaba culture. I remember the sad event of Michael Omoho Osigbeme. Mitch was Isa, but he had lived with our family for many years. He spoke Igbo, and he was getting ready to marry an Asaba girl. When the soldiers came to our compound, he attempted to save the family by calling his name and tracing his Isa parentage. But his accent was Igbo, and it was ironical that two aggrieved Asian soldiers who thought they were being deceived, shot Mitch and went forward to kill my father and my brothers. Don't you see the compound? We have a new generation of Ojogu boys. The cream of the men of my generation are all gone. It was a terrible time, recounted Mrs. Ojogu. In the same vein, Peter Nwokolo, a Red Cross member, went to his in-laws across to the Ogbiausa community in Cable Point. He had some gifts to give away to his Hausa in-laws. He never made it. He was attacked by soldiers who did not bother that he was in Red Cross uniform. And a Doma boy saves Iye's family. It was very difficult to escape Asaba in the days following the entry of the federal troops. Mr. Iye, a very successful produce buyer with the United African Company, UAC, in the former province of Adamawa and part of northern Nigeria, counted himself as one of the few lucky survivors. Quote, the fact was that the soldiers attacked our houses and families in groups. If the rescue platoon failed to snatch you, the infantry, the engineering, or the signals unit will make sure they eliminate you on the spot or march you and family to the killing zones. So if you escape one group, another batch will come knocking at the door. I made up my mind that my family will stay with me at home. The first batch came in, left after we paid cash for our lives. The second platoon searched the whole house. Besides my bedroom was my hair gun. Emmanuel and a Doma private covered up that corner, preventing his soldiers from spotting the weapon. On departure, Emmanuel, who confessed he was a practicing Christian, warned the Iyes to dispose of the gun. Your whole house and family would have been burned down if this officer saw that gun, he warned. The last batch to visit my house were very unfriendly. They ordered all my family, including my brothers and nephews, out. The officer ordered us to kneel down and prepare to meet Ojuku, your brother. He wanted us to move out from the house to join others in the procession. I assured him that I had made up my mind that we would end it up in my house. My family would not move. He cocked his gun and raised the muzzle of the gun. Something came into me, and like a leopard, I leaped and knocked up the gun from him and turned the gun on his head. Duala, Kabiri, that is, please take it easy, was the response of the other soldiers. And at that point, they asked for the money we had offered them, of which they had rejected. Before I relented, I made them swear in the name of Allah that they would never molest me or my family. They did, and I returned their gun to them. The officer stationed one of his batsmen in front of my house with a sword. Also, an inscription on my door, "Out of bounds," was boldly written. From then, the platoon that came up subsequently avoided my house. In fact, Police ASP Alfonso Okolo was in my house for a while. When he decided to return to his house, I prayed him to remain with me. Later, his daughter came back crying. The big man had answered a knock on his door. Immediately, he showed his face at the door. They hit him point blank on the head. Now, late Ugo, the Abiola of the Western Igbos. So I was in the group that finally made it to Ogbeosowa, recounted Mr. Okonji. We were made to kneel or sit on the mud. Behind me was Dr. Eugene Aquile, calmly writing his last letter to his wife. Besides him was another young attorney, Mr. Abua. The latter was mortally wounded, dying after a struggle. They had started the killing by the selection of 3 or more titled people who will be shot in front of us. Obi Okeleke, Unwalue, Obi Unwani, and an innocent brother of the Catholic mission, Reverend Ignatius, were the first prominent chiefs and civilians to be executed. Then the machine gun. The soldier I saw in Biafran army uniform on the 5th, I recollect, was there protesting the killings. He was ordered out of the scene. It was now clear to me that he was on a race the first time I saw him. When they introduced the machine guns, people collapsed in piles, and I had 2 bullets piercing my shoulders and my pelvis, with the 3rd lodging in my left arm. You can see the holes, that is the scars. He validated. At that point, wailings and agonizing cries of the dying wounded temporarily disturbed the concentration of the soldiers. From my position, I could manage to identify the frightening causes of the old men. Some caused the bloodthirsty soldiers in words that could only be spoken by the spirits. Others, in the name of the goddess of the river Niger, willed that the murderers of the innocent souls of Asaba would never escape the Onishe's wrath. In that strange commotion, I could see a young man whose palm and fingers were blasted and fried by machine guns fire. That was a sight that sent me to sleep. The nerves of those hands stood pointing to the skies like computer wires. Closing my eyes, the dying voice of Mr. Tolefe haunted my sleep. In pains, he was crying for his wife, begging her to please get me water to quench my thirst. Please, Ofune Biko, mili, la. Even though I found myself eventually at Achala, I cannot ever say what gave me the strength or how I made it to that village. It was Jesus. He saved me. I was treated with native herbs after my farmer host poured the local dry gin, that is kai on my open wound. Though the pain almost killed me, I was too weak to cry. The bullet continued to sit on my arm until the quick intervention of the Red Cross saved me from amputation. Meanwhile, the execution of 2 prominent Asaba giants, Mr. Leo Okogu and Mr. Michael Ugo, sent the whole inner town scampering in terror. Some women had brought their corpses from Ogbeosowa in a truck. The people's morale sank to the lowest ebb. If there were men supposed to survive the rampage, these men in the truck were the sacred cows. By 1967, Michael Chukwudebe Ugo was the Abiola of the Western Igbos. He was the giant benevolent capitalist that took care of the personal and group problems of the Western Igbos in Lagos. Moreover, he was familiar with and respected by cream of the Nigerian army. As an executive of the army pay and records in Lagos, he was responsible for those families whose husbands were away fighting against the Axis powers in Burma and the Far East during the Second World War. Secondly, he was a very wealthy man, coming up as a distributor of the West African pilots and later moving into the shipping business, anchoring as a sound importer with a trade network all over the country. He had told his wives to remain calm. We are going to give the Federal Army the best reception. Entertain them so much that they will be happy to stay at Asaba. In other words, Ugo was ready to buy out Asaba from any trouble. Well, he did. He lavished money on the soldiers, and for a time, the soldiers referred cases to him for identification before taking action on suspects. Therefore, to humiliate him and Okogu thus meant that nobody was safe. The people fled. Close to the police station killing spots along Unebisi Road, Asaba, the marauding soldiers threw a grenade into the gleaming Mercedes-Benz car of the late Michael Ugo. In the booth of the burning car were over £500,000 that went with the ashes. When his giant younger brother, Okotubo, learned of what happened, he declared war. Mounting a sniper's position on one of Cable Point's story buildings, he opened fire on any Nigerian soldier in sight. Before long, the Federal Army returned with a platoon of soldiers, circled the building, and charged. The giant fell, grinding to death. His double-barrel hunting gun did not let him down. Like a Spartan, he died a man. That was the end of that family's business ventures, a sorrowful end of a benevolent capitalist, and a sad epitaph for a handsome ladies' man, an unnecessary death for a captain of industry whose Midas touch, a metric rise as an early empire builder, was cut down by paranoia unsobered by his overflowing wallet. The Archbishop of West Africa visits Asaba war front. So in the midst of the rampage and the massacres, the Archbishop of West Africa, Reverend Patterson, arrived at Asaba. He was accompanied by Mr. Udo Deg, President of the Red Cross. When the Archbishop was showed the register of the Asaba dead, the man of God was amazed. Most of the prominent names were members of his Anglican church. Even then, before his eyes, destruction of properties and molestation of innocent civilians by federal troops continued. That was the last straw. He left Asaba immediately. In Lagos, he wrote General Yakubu Gowon a letter. The content of the letter, among others, read as follows. Asaba is the first Igbo town to fall into the hands of the federal military government. It is how you and your soldiers treat the people of Asaba and environs will prove to the whole world whether this war is against secession or a genocide against the Igbos. The letter jolted the federal government, already aware of the atrocities committed by the federal troops in Asaba. Yakubu Gowon queried the second divisional command and went further to reassure a new code of conduct for that army's forward location. The Asaba bloody experience in many ways checkmated the advancing Nigerian soldiers few days to the capitulation of Biafra. January 1970, the Igbo's heartland was finally overrun by smiling 3rd Marine commandos riding into town on bicycles. A disciplined army, in its full flush of victory, exhibited the greatest magnanimity to the Biafran side. It was an unprecedented and an unpredicted resolution, an equally unusual outcome, judging by the implacable positions and the bloody and brutal antecedents of the parties in conflict. Then Dr. Azikiwe visited Asaba. There was no hiding the facts on the killings. Even the news of Dr. Nnamdi Azikiwe's defection from Biafra did not bury the story of the Asaba massacre. Indeed, when Zik arrived at Asaba, 1969, narrated Ms. Ojogu, he was astounded by the scale of the civilian killings. I remember that Zik came here when Asaba was performing the burial ceremonies of Mr. Ejiofor. Zik joined a few mourners and at a stage started asking questions about the whereabouts of his former friends, E.C. Phillips, MBE VC, A. Idigbe, MBE, D.N. Modi, Michael Udgo, Leo Kogu, J.T. Ogbolu, etc. The replies he got jolted him. He openly lamented the demise of these prominent sons of the town and promised to intensify his efforts to ending the civil war. Then you have the Corporal Ibrahim Mohammed Sanusi. Allah will never forgive you. During the second operations, recalled my uncle, Joachim, I was buried under my mattresses, hiding away from 3 Ijaw soldiers that came to my house. When they could not locate me, they picked my son, Kanayo. On their way to the River Niger, Corporal Ibrahim Mohammed Sanusi confronted them and asked where they were heading to. Now, Biafran soldier, they replied, you know see how it is yellow. Corporal Ibrahim did not waste his time on further interrogation. He quickly bundled everybody to the brigade, where the brigade major released the boy. Escorting him home, he demanded to see Kanayo's father. His surprised father wanted to know why the corporal saved his son. He said, my father told me never to kill anybody in cold blood. If you ever kill innocent people, Allah will never forgive you. That was what that corporal said. Now, Asaba, the second military operation and death of Omu of Asaba. Military operations in Asaba, following the Biafran sporadic harassment from the bushes, elicited further cases of house burning, displacement of people, and killings. These operations, which spanned from 1968 to 1969, might not be as catastrophic as the October 7th tragedy in 1967. Nevertheless, it fell into the same pattern. The civilian population were held responsible for the act of the Biafran army. Once the federal troops observed Biafran movement in the textile mills area up to the cable point, the natives, who were almost settling down to community-level traditional lifestyles, were ordered back to St. Patrick's College on the Okpanam Road. Those who refused to go were gunned down. There was the case of one Mr. Ejiofor who was willing to move, but it was his beard that implicated him. He had an Ojuku beard. Ejiofor was shot on his way to St. Patrick's College refugee camp. But one lady, the Omu of Asaba, Madame Bushie Okolie, refused to be dislodged. She was the queen of the town, and according to her, it was taboo for her to leave her home for a refugee camp. The soldiers tried to force her to change her mind, but each time the guns boomed or the mortar fell, the Omu remained. Like the rock of Gibraltar, stuck in her house. It was her proven supernatural powers that attracted a lot of people, especially during the first entry of the federal troops in Asaba to her. With her little granddaughter, Madame Okolie went through mortars and machine gun fire, picking up and ministering to the wounded. During the second round of operations, many natives flocked to her house at Umuaji quarters. Soldiers who attempted to molest those civilians always changed their mind at her door. Meanwhile, many old men and women who could not resist the cold and open life at the refugee camps died. Some who returned home only to see their houses burned, collapsed, and died. Reverses on the federal attempt to cross the Niger were about this time in 1969 blamed on the goddess of the river. So Frank E.J. is an albino. He had to be picked up and prepared for sacrifice to appease the... Oh, okay. So Frank E.J., an albino sacrifice for the river goddess. So Frank E.J. is an albino. He had to be picked up and prepared for sacrifice to appease the rampaging river goddess. Federal Army reverses across the River Niger were blamed on the goddess. Therefore, the federal commanders approached the Omu of Asaba on what to do. After a while, she advised them to appease the goddess by offering her a sacrifice. That sacrifice must be an albino albino bull. When the federal soldiers could not find an albino bull, they went for a human albino. Frank Ije was on his way to be prepared for sacrifice when the Omu approached them. She counseled that any deviation might spell doom for everybody dependent on the river. It was in their own interest never to sacrifice any human blood for the goddess. Releasing their condemned and trembling humans captive, they were later to find an albino bull from a nearby village, which they sacrificed to the river goddess. Frank Ije is still alive by the grace of the late Omu of Asaba. When later the Omu fell out of favor with the federal army and they got her murdered, the whole Omus within the Western Igbo enclave marshaled out to accord their own befitting burial. From Asaba, where she was killed, to Agbo, where a postmortem was performed, the Omus of Okpanam, Ogwachioku, the Iseles, Igbodo, Ika Kingdom, and beyond all lined up on the express to pay their last respects. Top on the list of marauders were vicious Benin and Yoruba-speaking Nigerian soldiers who, without orders, killed a lot of innocent people, burning most of the houses. One night, towards the end of the war, the Omu was closeted in their inner room by some men and stabbed repeatedly. After raising alarm in the dead of the night, this courageous queen of Asaba was later picked up from a pool of blood in the morning hours. Beside her remains was a federal soldier in mufti, mouth agape, obviously unable to talk or walk away from his butchered victim. Wow, that's some level of jazz, man. So the graceful queen had lost her breast and part of her body were mutilated. Asaba and its environs were so hounded that the surrounding bushes became havens for the natives. There was one funny episode. The people of Okwe behind the Asaba textile mills devised an ingenious means of staying alive. Inside the farmland by daytime, they would pile up bags of yams, crawl under the yam camouflage, and forget the war. Federal soldiers or hungry Biafran guerrillas would either unsuspectingly march off or collect as much food as they needed and moved on. One fateful day, a federal army patrol got into this farm and decided to lie on the food pile. The suffocating and agonizing cries beneath the mounds of camouflage was enough to tell that all that passed as harvest might not have been cassava or yams alone. So, Philly, mind you, I am not yet dead. In his brilliant treatise, The Effects of the Nigerian Civil War on Asaba, presented to the Department of History and Archaeology, University of Nigeria, Nsukka, in July 1992, Unwafili Charles Kenobia revealed further unedited eyewitness account of the carnage at Asaba. In his first testimony, Mr. V.O. Ije pointed out that by last census results, the population of Asaba was about 12,000. The community, accordingly, was made up of basically farmers, some fishermen, and others were petty traders. During the war, I was at Ibusa, but when shellings were booming, I trekked with my wife and 3 children from Ibusa to Asaba. We thought we would be safe, but when we came here, it was terrible. At that time, Oboshi Bridge at Ibusa was broken. The advancing Nigerian soldiers went back to Ogwachi Uku from where they came into Asaba. It was here in Asaba that the war started. Very many people were massacred. I was separated from my wife. In fact, I faced firing squad here. Corpses littered everywhere. We were taken to a field. When we got there, we saw so many dead bodies, but in that circumstance, did not recognize anybody. We were then asked to dig our graves. In fact, I was saying my prayers. We dug a very huge grave where we were forced by these Nigerian soldiers to pack into the grave those already dead. These dead bodies were up to 200 in number. Even my own cousin was among them. He was shot in the lungs and was bleeding profusely. As I was obeying the command, I put him down into the ground hole. Anthony, in one final effort, gasped, "Ophelia, mind you, I'm not dead yet. I'm not yet dead." I stopped his agony by covering him with sand. He was like many others buried alive. Next, the father of my wife. He was very old, and I was feeding him then. So when he heard I was taken away, he decided to come and be killed as well. After digging the graves, he was asked to jump into the grave by the Nigerian soldiers. While inside the grave, he was shot at. They could not get at him, so he was covered. So he died just like that. We dug another grave for ourselves. Before we were told to jump into the grave, two other brothers came in. One was an undergraduate of Ibadan University. The other was a civil servant. Both of them were dumped into the grave and shot, and the grave covered. The two members of the Oyana family, but I have forgotten their first names now. But I claimed that I was not Asaba. I claimed to be a Sierra Leonean. My name was Vincent Martins. We were told to lie down on the field. We all lay down on the field. They shot at us. In fact, the bullet missed me and shot somebody in front of me. That was one Mr. Chukwuma of Abala. He died, and so we were told to get up. The man who saved us was one soldier called Billy Awes from Rivers. When I told him that I was not a Nigerian, he said they did not kill foreign nationals. But some soldiers said that I was using Igbo sense on them. Fortunately, one Ebusa man and David Okafor from Asaba, who said he was a Yoruba man but couldn't speak Yoruba, were saved. We were taken to St. Joseph Maternity along Unebisi Road here in Asaba. We were there until 8 p.m. before we were asked to go. St. Joseph Maternity was where the women were kept. As we were going in the night, we came to one area called Ogbe Osowa. We saw thousands of dead bodies. Those were the people who went to dance. So it was on this night that I crossed over to Ibusa. The guns were booming, and there was always fear of air raids. At that time, soldiers camped at Ibusa, but each time they came, we all ran into the bush. They came to the stream, Atakpo, and each time they came, they started shooting up. I remember one day when they came to destroy Dr. Okonkwo's house. People were very, very scared, so we ran into the bush. Until one morning, the Biafrans scared them at Okonfi, and there was shooting, and the entire Ibusa ran into the bush. Those who could not run were shot dead. So we ran to a farm in the bush. Biafrans accused us of contributing money for the Nigerian soldiers. Fortunately, the children I was teaching were there. In fact, I was taken by the Biafrans. It was one Mr. Otoma of Umedem who followed me. He saved me. So when we got there, the soldier who betrayed me also brought me out. It was then I reminded him that I taught him in class 7. That same Biafran soldier later drowned in a stream. From Ibusa, we ran back to Oko, from where we came back, and later we ran to Isele Uku, Ogwashi Uku, then back to Ibusa. We fed on farm products, though the food was not palatable. In Oko, we were stricken by hunger. They forced our women, that is Ibusa and Asaba women, to swear an oath. They wanted them to swear that they would never invite the federal soldiers into Oko. But unfortunately for them as well, the Nigerian soldiers still came in and they still had to run. They were laughing at us when we ran into their town naked. Many of them were killed and some ran to Abala. So when they ran, they had to experience what we saw. Those women who wanted to follow the Nigerian soldiers followed them, but the faithful ones remained behind with their husbands. Many girls free to go with them, though, to my own knowledge, no husband was shot on this account. It should be noted that some women even plotted to kill their husbands with these soldiers. A. Anyafulu, 65. I cannot bury my mother. So another person's account. I remember September 30th, 1967. Teachers were asked to come back to Asaba to collect their salaries, which we did not get after so long. So I decided to leave because I was not happy with the way things were going, and the situation at Asaba then was critical. Before I could get transport to Akumazi, my station, I spent so many hours at the motor park, so I left Asaba on 1st of October, 1967. Then war is evil, especially when the supposed Nigerian soldiers who claimed that the reasons why they invaded the Midwest, even to Biafra land, was to stop the secessionists, the Biafran Republic. But the atrocities they committed at Asaba and the environs on civilians later showed that it wasn't an effort to stop the secessionists. It was a complete genocide. And everybody that is sharing their own accounts, eyewitness accounts, tells the same story. The real evil of that supposed civil war was the Nigerian soldiers who were killing their own fellow Nigerians. Put it that way, like you are killing your fellow Nigerians, massacring them in a genocidal form. Not that they actually had so much engagement with the soldiers, the Biafran soldiers. Do you understand? That's why they said that Nigeria-Biafra genocidal war, right? The casualties are civilians. And the people that killed the civilians most, they are the Nigerian soldiers. It was like they were filled with rage and all what have you. So, and it was like a killing. A coordinated kind of killings until when they were sort of sanctioned. And by the time they finally got to Biafra Republic, Enugu and the other places, to engage with the real soldiers there, when they surrendered, the same level of carnage, atrocities was never repeated in Biafra land. But on the way to, this is why the record of over 3 million people killed, right, during that needless civil war is facts. Well, let me continue. So Akumasi is very close to Agbo. In fact, the very day I reached Akumasi, there was war at Umunede. The Christians at Akumasi took me into their home because where I was living was very close to the major road. After about a week, I went back to my house. We were only hearing the bombings and sounds of gunshots. I stayed at Akumasi during the war and came at intervals to Asaba. I heard many disturbing stories while at Akumasi during the war. One was that nearly all Asaba people had been killed and their houses burned. I was more disturbed when 2 weeks after the camping of soldiers at Agbo, I met some Yoruba boys whom I taught in school. I asked them to help me go over to Asaba to find out what was happening. They used the phrase, "Sir, Asaba is a ghost town. Sir, don't go there. We will not advise you to go there." After about a month or so, my sister arrived. She told me all that had happened. Her own husband was killed. My relations, including Ajulu Obigbe, were killed. My own mother left the town and nobody knew her whereabouts. My best friend as at that time, Wabueze Oyana, was also killed along with two of his brothers of the same parentage. That is 3 brothers in a family. Another very sorrowful thing was the death of Ego's children. Ego, who had no children with her husband for ages, had 2 boys of late, and the 2 boys were well fed. These boys were killed during the war. By April, we learned that Asaba was under fire, that all the people were gathered at SPC, St. Patrick's College, Asaba. So many had been killed, and the houses at Asaba burnt. There was no person to tell me these stories until December, when my relation, Mrs. Obiaya, came to inform me of the death of my mother in the East. She also told me that my sister left Asaba since April, and since then had not been seen. So I had to travel to Asaba for the burial. When I came to Asaba, there was nothing like talking about burial ceremony. People were blaming me for coming because they felt that the soldiers were still after the town's male children. In fact, nobody was thinking of burying the dead. They were not even sure of living up to the next minute. Captain Banke's order, Paul Enemo. On that fateful day, I dressed up with my friend and we left for the dancing ground. As we approached the dancing ground at Ogbeosowa, my friend, who was also afraid, started discussing with me that we should go back, that everything was not normal. With this, I heeded his advice and we went back. Before we came into my grandmother's house, we started hearing gunshots from different directions. It was later I learned that those who went to welcome Nigerian soldiers were shot dead. My uncle, Ajuli Obi Ugbe, was killed in the incidents with my other relatives and friends. During that night, my friend Captain Banke came over and told me that I must leave, that they had instructions to kill any living thing in Asaba. It was there and then I escaped to Agbo. Madam O. Achuzia, God bless Father Colon, our own account. The war came into Asaba on the 4th of October. They told us, and look at them. Fuck, man. Let me show you this image. This one is, you can see these guys. These ones are called the observers. These ones, they're like the international observers in the Biafran, what have you. These are the Nigerian soldiers carrying out their order. Here is what's the story behind that? They said it's the Biafran supply car, and then here this as well. Ogbeosowa killing ground. So this is where thousands of people were also slaughtered. It's called the Ogbeosowa killing ground in Asaba. Anyway, so they told us to come and welcome them as one Nigeria with traditional dances. It was here they ended up killing a lot of Asaba people. I was lucky I did not attend the occasion. The execution was carried out in various villages at Otuogu village. They executed some Asaba people, including the Ogbeilo village dancing group. A similar incident occurred at Ogbeosowa, also, which was more in terms of the number of people involved. Some of those mass graves contained about 60 bodies each. In the village ground also, a similar execution was almost carried out, that is, at St. Patrick's College, Asaba. We were invited to the school, and when we got there, they started separating the men from the women. They were keeping us or selecting us out for execution. I was one of those selected for execution. It was a white Reverend Father, then in charge of the school, that saved us from being killed. The father is known as Reverend Father Colon. Now, Lawrence Odiachi. I saw Miriam's father executed. You know, the same, I think, Miriam Babangida. Yeah, I think they said that our father was also executed. Now, here is Mr. Lawrence Odiachi's account, okay? Said, the magnitude of the killing was so much that we did not believe Asaba would still exist after the war. It is even a surprise to most of us that there are people in Asaba. The English, then, we refer to this as unbelievable. In fact, a lot of atrocities were committed against Asaba people. I don't really know I don't really know which experience to relate to you, because the experiences we had then were innumerable. Asaba indigents were killed, properties were burnt or taken away by the Nigerian soldiers. I was one of those lined up at Ogbeosowa village. The soldiers stated that they wanted to use us as examples. Though I was a kid then, but I still remember what happened. At least somebody up to the age of 16 then will be able to say or observe a few things. It was in my presence that one Mr. Okogu, suspected to be the father of the current Nigerian president's wife, was shot. So Mr. Okogu was Miriam Babangida's, so she's not Miriam. Was she Miriam? Anyway, she's the daughter of Mr. Okogu, who later became the wife of Babangida, Miriam Babangida. So in our present day lineup, so in our presence, they lined up about 10 people whom they shot as an example to us of what was going to be our fate in the next few minutes. Now, here is another account. Onyanwa Omezi, 94. My spirit was not for the dance of death. The civil war came into Asaba through Asaba Benin Road. They came into Asaba in the night. When they came into Asaba, they did not bomb any place to the best of my knowledge. When they came in, they just started shooting at people everywhere. So when most of us had the opportunity, we disappeared into the bush with our children. One morning, at about 8 a.m., they started shooting and killing people with greater intensity. When they came across any Asaba man, they asked him to go over to the dancing ground for the traditional dance. Most of us thought that after the dance, soldiers will leave Asaba. So most people in Asaba dressed on that day in the traditional native white cloth to the dancing ground. I was not moved into going. So I was in front of my house, when 2 Nigerian soldiers came by and asked me to prepare and proceed to the field for the dance. One of these soldiers came from the Igbo side of the Midwestern region, and he was hanging a medal that looked like that of the Roman Catholics. The other soldier was the one that invited us to the dancing ground where we had the old court. Now, these 2 soldiers invited us to the court. So the Midwestern Igbo soldier drew us apart a little and asked me to run away from Asaba, that I should not come to the court or else I will be killed. Then the other soldier was still in front of my house. So I went behind through the back door into my room and locked myself in. An old man, the Holy Trinity killing ground. His mother's name was Abumohu, and we called him Dancing. His mother's stint with the Nigerian prison influenced his joining the Nigerian army. Dancing was a huge retired officer, and on the 7th of October, he assured our group of about 50 men that what was happening was bad news. He maintained that when an army rounds up people in a maneuver targeted against a whole community, the end is disaster. Testified Mr. Anioku. When we got to the Holy Trinity playground, Asaba, the whole field was full. The civilians were surrounded by soldiers. The field was a mixture of Asaba, Abo, Ndoni, Ibusa, Ila, Aniocha, and Agbo peoples. For example, as an eyewitness and probably the only one still alive, observed this traditional doctor, I saw one prominent Ishan family stretched on the goalpost of the football field. These people assembled in the field were picked from Otogu Riverine Beach adjacent to the main market. That area is inhabited by many Nigerian people. So, I'd lived there since the colonial period. The soldiers did not believe anybody who claimed to be Ishan, Ijo, or otherwise. One voice, Michael Odita, the son of a Pascal. So here is an account, okay? In quotes. One voice, Michael Odita, the son of Pascal Odita, from Ogbeilo, persisted. Very fluent in Hausa language. He constantly rose to defend the charges leveled on the poor civilians. The soldiers warned him to shut up. Next time, he stood up. He was gunned down, protesting vehemently the innocence of the poor souls around him. The sight of a dying man sent the shivers down my spine, and I wanted desperately to go to the bathroom. I opened the zip of my trouser, and holding to my manhood, the amused soldier gave way, and I escaped into the bush and moved across the path leading to the hospital, where there were no more soldiers. Behind the hospital, I took the bearing towards Ugbolu, to Ila. By this time, it was getting to the evening hours before heading to the main road to Ila. I heard the cracking of machine guns. The sounds were repetitive and intense. I sped off, and before midnight, made it on foot to Ugbolu. It was around 1 a.m. that I marched into my family house at Ila. The following week, when I returned to Asaba to resume duties as the storekeeper of the urban council on the orders of the army commander, I learned the details of the Holy Trinity massacre. Dancing and the full capacity squatters in the field were shot and buried en masse. Like, who does that? Yeah? You walk straight into the civilian community, you rounded them up, and then you were shooting them like it's a game. That is the dark side of that, fake civil war. They call it civil war. It's not civil war. It was a genocide on the part of Nigeria. Like, you understand that these are like civilians. Why do you have to like round them up? The young, the old, separate men from boys. It was ethnic cleansing. And none of these guys were punished. None of them. They were called heroes of Nigeria, heroes past. They are celebrating Nigerian Army's Day. Like, what the fuck, man? Like, Army Day. Celebrating Army Day. Nigerian Armed Forces Day. Nigerian Army never really fought any war to save Nigeria from external aggression. Your dead soldiers were murderers, genocidists, bunch of psychos. That's what happened. That is not war. That's genocide, man. So if anybody is telling you that they are celebrating Army Day, Soldier Day, or nonsense that they put out there, that's absolute rubbish. This is dark. For real, it's dark. They were not fighting soldiers, people with guns. They were not fighting the Biafran soldiers who had guns. They were killing civilians, rounding them up, like butchering them, burning their properties. To what end? And they were supposed to be Nigerians, so they were not like Biafra. They were Nigerians. So as about these places, so they were like, oh, liberated places, they are Nigerians. We are Nigerians. So you are going after the secessionists, right? But they are slaughtering civilians. That's what they did. Mass burials everywhere. So doing the Armed Forces Remembrance Day. Armed Forces Remembrance Day for who? God damn it, man. Damn. What kind of like humans existed in that era? Who are those people? Eh? No, they will still have that same behavior till today. You see the Nigerian soldiers. Nigerian soldiers, like they are like anywhere they go, they wreak havoc, they unleash terror on civilians. Civilians. Fuck, man. This is not war. This wasn't war. This was genocide. That's the point. Genocide. And they were never punished. None of them, all their commanders, all of them, none of them was tried for crime against humanity. You were killing your own people. Your own supposed, like, let's even use the context of, okay, the Biafrans, the Nigerian side, they were slaughtering their own people. They were supposed to be Nigerians, but they didn't give a damn. It was like ethnic, tribal cleansing on a steady. You know that you are Igbo like that, so you get. And this was supposed, to make the matter worse, this was those who came to welcome them. One Nigeria, they killed them. The most brutal way of doing the Armed Forces Remembrance Day. Our soldiers defended our land. Who kill you there, you and your soldiers? Which defended which land? What land did they defend? It's all bullshit, man. No, god damn it, man. Like, what the heck? So throughout the week, in scattered locations, the exterminations continued because it was beyond understanding. We shall close by inviting here David Astor, who, on the anniversary of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, explained that mass exterminations are themselves related to lesser killings. We must learn more of the fatal, fearful process of thought which makes people feel not only justified, but that they have a duty to destroy others. We cannot tell what may excite this process of mass psychology. Its next form may not be racial or religious, but political, as has happened before in times of revolution or civil wars. Indonesia, Asaba, Malay, Pakistan, Asaba. God damn it, man. It just makes my stomach kind of like turned, man. Damn it. I expected those who survived there to just, get the names. Asaba war victims. No wonder when the Biafrans begin to read the names, here, for those who were able, for those names, those who went to dance. This is the part now in chapter 6 of this book. That's chapter 6 of this book. So we have just about 25 minutes now to go, and I don't think 25 minutes will do enough justice to this, okay? Meanwhile, just for the record as well, this book acknowledges that, the former Nigerian Army Chief of Staff, Chris Ali, actually saved a lot of lives as well, yeah. That is his image. Ali is said to have saved a lot of lives, according to this publisher. You see that former Nigerian Army Chief of Staff, Chris Ali, alias Bob, of New Bethel College, saved a lot of souls in Asaba. Oba, Jama, Adidas, Okenya schoolboy, soccer, superstar are alive today because Lieutenant General prevented their digging their own graves at the Holy Ghost killing zone. I was in civil war. They said that the Biafran soldiers were rebels. So you were supposed to go after them, right? But no, Baba, it was ethnic cleansing. Anything that has anyone and everyone that has any Igbo heritage, Igbo, anything at all, they were to be rounded up and killed. And that's exactly what they did. That's not civil war. What's goddamn social, ethnic cleansing, genocide. I mean, you're fighting war, you say, okay, Nigeria was fighting Cameroon. So Nigerian soldiers, right? The Cameroon soldiers, they are moving to Nigeria, and Nigeria pushed back, and now Nigerian soldiers are now in Cameroon, and then they are doing all these atrocities, as much as it is not acceptable, right? But nevertheless, you are killing your own people. This is not like Nigerian soldiers, okay, they enter Cameroon, or Nigerian soldiers enter Niger, or Nigerian soldiers entered Benin Republic. No. They were in Nigeria. They were killing their own supposed Nigerians to send what message? Civilians, for that matter, civilians. They know they were civilians. God damn it, man. Animals. They said your heroes passed. We'll go kill you and your heroes passed. Who are the heroes? Heroes where? Armed Forces Remembrance Day. Armed Forces Remembrance Day. To remember who? To remember murderers, psychotic, criminals. That's not history. That's absolute trash. Nobody should be proud of that. Nobody. It's unfortunate that Nigeria is in mess, continue to remain in mess, right? Because stuff like this, people escape justice. They were never punished. They were rewarded. That's why the hatred is so deep now. That some people are even willing to do it again. Let's kill them. We'll kill all of them. We'll kill everybody. Because nobody was punished. People will get gone. You didn't go and fight them. Everywhere they had real encounters with the Nigerian, with the Biafran soldiers, they slaughtered them like anything. But rather than for them to take their revenge on the Biafran soldiers, we get guns. They were taking the revenge on civilians. Civilians. Yeah. Anyway, here is the part of the dance of death. Let me read that before. Oh, okay. Yeah, let me try that and see if I can cover that in 25 minutes, okay? Chapter 6, the dance of death. No general penalty, pecuniary or otherwise, shall be inflicted upon the population on account of the acts of individuals for what they cannot be regarded as jointly or severally responsible. Of quote, the wasted nations. Quoted from Article 50, number 4 of the Geneva Convention. The last and bloody act of resistance by the Biafran army to forestall federal final objective in the Midwest fizzled out on October 5, 1967. That same night, led by Lieutenant Colonel Ibrahim Taiwo, the 7th Brigade of the Nigerian Army rolled into Asaba. Captain Ike Nwachukwu, who was the brigade major leading the forward locations, recounted that the federal units that entered were busy exploring how to cross to Onitsha and therefore had very little contact with civilians. The federal takeover of Asaba and the Biafran sudden withdrawal totally left the people confused and divided. Series of meetings were held at the Palace of Asaba to prepare for the reception of federal troops. At the same time, many rallies were held, with some prominent politicians addressing those gatherings. Some saw the federal advance as a blessing. Indeed, the overthrow of the NCNC party grip on local politics, with the position of Chief Obafemi Awolowo clearly on the side of the federal government. Action group activists and chiefs in the town were in jubilating mood. The NCNC countered, and in one of the rallies in the town, a prominent NCNC politician called on the people to fight to a finish. The chief, in a frenzy, asked the people to arm themselves with bottles and stones and resist the enemy. Elsewhere, a high-ranking Biafran officer and a son of the soil, Captain Odiachi, organized a youth suicide squad, arming them with pangas and machetes. On the streets, this youth could be heard singing loudly, "We are Biafrans, fighting for our lives. By the name of Jesus, we shall conquer. We are Biafrans fighting for our lives. By the name of Jesus, we shall conquer. I remember that song with cutlasses. In Umuaji, the Wemembu family openly berated the Biafrans' doors. Ndi Igbo, your time is up. The Biafran soldiers lost their tempers and opened fire and almost wiped out that family. In this confusing state of affairs, the Otu Ihaza and ruling age group of the Asaba community intensified their meeting but could not arrive at any conclusion. This was the situation because the scenario presented them with little information. There was no information on the exact position of the Nigerians. The Biafrans continued indulging in propaganda, explaining to the people that the firing within earshot were theirs, that they were mopping up operations to drive the Federal Army all the way back to Benin and Lagos. When they started to run for it, the explanation left behind was that they were going to refuel or get some ammunition across the Niger. The problem was compounded by some Asaba boys in the Biafran army. This group, acknowledging Asaba as not belonging in the Biafran map, however, went ahead identifying the Biafran goals with the goals of the Asaba people. On the whole, the Otu Ihaza failed to ascertain the size and equipment of the incoming federal troops, or federal forces rather. It was obvious that this noble age group, because of the uncertainty of the times and bereft of modern communication expertise, fell prey to the Biafran propaganda. On the other hand, the Asaba in council was regular in his meeting with the Olinzeles and the titled chiefs. Eventually, it was decided that an elaborate reception be held for the federal troops. Each of the 5 quarters in Asaba was levied 25 pounds for the upkeep of the federal army. The Omu of Asaba was to present a big Asaba native woven cloth to the commander of the federal army. An address of welcome was prepared in which the community, in welcoming the federal troops, pointed out that the Asaba people were peaceful, were never party to or aware of the Biafran incursion, and expressed happiness over the town's liberation from the rebels. By this time, the first shells had started shaking the town and bullets were pouring in. There were no willing members of the council ready to take the welcome address to the invading troops, who by the 4th of October were just within the grounds of St. Patrick's College. On that day, due to the continuous shelling of the town, the Asaba abandoned ship and left for the east. With the Asaba gone, an interesting development occurred. Most members of the Asaba titled chiefdom, who were the leaders of the action group and had opposed the Asaba's installation, emerged as the new leaders of thought. Obi Okudare, who had earlier contested for Asaba chieftaincy with the incumbents Obi Okeleke Odiachi, the Ogene of Asaba, Chief Alexander Idigbe, the Ajie of Asaba, Obi Unjotia, the Isama of Asaba, etc., all saw the running away of the Asaba and some NCNC leaders as the dawn of the action group government. At this point, the Odogu of Asaba, a staunch action group member and a dreaded hunter, with a reputation of possessing supernatural powers because of his prowess in hunting down dangerous animals, decided to go out and meet the advancing troops and present the address of welcome abandoned at the Asaba's palace. So Odogu confronts the federal troops. On the 5th of October, 1967, the Odogu, before he left his house, stepped into his bedroom and brought out his hunter's garb with his shining silvery saber. His family, who watched him dress for that mission, confessed that he refused to talk and was never seen in such transformation. He waded into the flying bullets and managed to reach the federal troops some kilometers forward of St. Patrick's College. He was not allowed to read his address for the advancing troops were not in a friendly mood. A distraught and heavily buffeted hunter returned to his family and announced that the family would move. His spirit foresaw danger. He proclaimed. At the departure of his family, he took one of his sons from his crying mother and went to sleep with his door wide open. He woke up to discover that soldiers had entered his house but could not do anything to him till the war ended. Chief Okonji, the Odogu, remained the only chief who stayed put at his house. His house was the only one which throughout the war retained his property, including his photograph with Chief Obafemi Awolowo's most renowned heir, late Chief D.S. Adegbero, still hanging on his sitting room walls. The first casualty of the Asaba operations was an elderly pensioner, late Chief Ezemba Njotea, who was relaxing on the balcony of his house when the first batch of the artillery shell hit him. Later on the same day, October 5, 1967, another hail of artillery cut down Mrs. Eunice Chukura. Now, the dance of death. Meanwhile, a planned procession by the Asaba community was announced, led by Obi Okudaru, I don't know. The procession of the 6th of October preceded a bigger reception to be accorded the federal troops the next day. Many natives who had taken to the bush or escaped to the neighboring villages of Ibusa and Achala were persuaded to return and join the October 7 procession. Obi Okudaru's message was that everything was returning to normal. In the morning of October 6th, before the first procession, the Niger Bridge was destroyed, frustrating federal advance to Onitsha. On the same day, when the procession was in progress, the streets were already littered with corpses of people caught in crossfire or by direct assault. Hence, many were reluctant to return to town. However, spirited preaching by one woman who went as far as Ibusa increased the fold. Asaba people, known for their pelvis back dance and merrymaking, were ready to give it all to the Nigerian army. Gold necklaces, earrings, costly native brass, ostales, and century-old artifacts of beauty were polished and adorned. The Nigerian army on the prowl was indeed melting. In fact, the procession was becoming a success when from nowhere someone started brandishing a master list. There was pandemonium. At the Umueze quarters, Mr. Sylvester Okocha, former chief welfare officer for Nwachukwu Nwabuzo, to hand over the Umueze quarters transmission to the army. According to him, in quote, his words: "On our way, after we joined the procession, we observed some frightful maneuvers. All the able-bodied men in town who were preparing for the reception were rounded up by the army. Those that resisted or tried to escape were shot on the spot. There was pandemonium and women cried. I joined the few that ran into the bush that awful day." So the procession of dancing troops of many colors was stopped at Ogbeeke Market Square by some soldiers not interested in any reception. Men were being separated from their wives and children. As the procession continued, there was ear-rending wailing as men who smelt a rat and refused to continue in the parade were instantly executed on the spot, while some of those shot were still singing and dancing to the irrepressible rhythm produced by the familiar flute and Marrakesh. The fatally wounded would give a jerk or two and slump down in final salute. It was the dance of the dead, a most appalling death. To see tall, handsome men broken, humiliated, and wasted before their mothers and wives was an abomination. Asaba was witnessing the death of our soul and pride, of all that gave meaning and purpose to our people and the city. And yet, the procession must continue to Ogbe Soa, the final square for the players and performers of the dance of death. The procession to Ogbe Soa. People were gathered in a number of spots. Prominent death spots included the police station, the river beach behind the Anglican maternity at Ogbogonogo, and Ogbeke Market. According to Wole Soyinka, in quote, 2 weeks ago, a corporal was brought in by his field officer to Lagos. He had shot 13 detainees in Asaba in cold blood. They were kept together in a stockade, and he was on guard. A young man, a Yoruba, quite a nice boy, he admitted shooting them in panic because they were talking in Igbo, and he asked them to speak in English. He decided that they were plotting something, so he turned his machine gun on them and killed them. The main procession, headed by Chief Okudare, progressed towards the Ogbeosowa village. Soldiers increased the park by rounding up many civilians to join the procession. There was a greater number of soldiers than civilians on the road. From King Street to the court, the road was littered with dead bodies. These are young brothers. You will be like them soon, was the menacing message of the officer in charge. Very soon at the corner of Ogbogonogo Market, men were separated from women and children. The medical director of Asaba Hospital, Dr. Eugene Akule, with his two brothers separated from their mother, raised his shaking hand and cried, "I'm the medical doctor of the town." The soldiers were not interested and continued the march. By this time, more groups of young men from many other collecting points had joined the main group, producing a sea of heads of civilians and soldiers that stretched from the Ogbogonogo Market down to government school near the Catholic mission. After the separation, the last child of the Akules decided to fight fate. He remembers, in quote, his words, "I walked up to the soldiers just like any elder brother did. Just like my elder brother did. I protested that I was only a small boy. I was going to go that side, being the side across the maternity where the women and children were moved. Just as the soldier, infuriated by my audacity, wanted to dismember me with his bayonet, I ran across, and there my mother wrapped her loincloth around me, crying, 'Oh, Obi, Uzo, they allowed you to go?' I did not tell my mother that I saw camouflaged in the green bushes around waiting soldiers, some machine guns on the ready." So the scattered procession, which started from the 5 main quarters of Asaba, finally converged at Ogbeosowa, a tiny village inside the town. Among the distinguished dancers was the president of Asaba Pensioners Association, D.N. Modi. When the green leaves camouflaging the machine guns were removed, Chief Modi scolded his people. "Ahaba, unuane une nahanya. You cannot stand in the face of death. Disappear." The machine guns drowned his statement and cut him down. His son, who refused to let go of his hand, died clinging to him. Chukwuma Nzeogu, managing director of a UNIC insurance group, was in that group, and a bullet went through his shoulder. He fell, and some dead persons fell on him. Dr. Ifeanyi Urai, a manager with West African Milk Company, fell down because people were falling on him too. That was how he was saved. By the time the machine guns clearly appeared, human beings formerly lined up by soldiers were jumping and jacking, this time to the music of fire and red lead. But it was still a dance of death. And when it was all over, there was a pile, a heap of meat, an indescribable nightmare, both to those who witnessed that butchering and those who did it. The effect on one of the officers was immediate. At the Ura story building on Ebusa Road, a large number of youth were gathered in familiar procession. That was the order of the day. Orders had already been given to wipe them out when the officer from the Ogbosowa killing spots emerged. It was obvious that he was experiencing extreme distress. He quickly ordered the civilians to take to their heels. However, another officer emerged from another group of young men and demanded why his hostages were released. As he engaged in a fight with the officer who ordered their release, his latest captives ran for their lives. Much has happened to transform Saul to Paul. Obi Okudare himself was shot several times and was presumed dead. He lay helplessly on the ground till the soldiers disappeared at nightfall. Now, Ogbosowas and the mountain of bodies. The civilians were not in the know when the federal troops moved in. When I saw those forces, I knew the war was over. Biafra would never stand a chance. Gregory Chichi of the central bank swore that he had never seen such a formation of mean, tall, and equipped battalions in life. From St. Patrick's College all the way to Cable Point, there was this vicious display of conquest. Very soon, these Godo illiterates descended on us, and after dealing with the town from 5th, 6th, and 7th, Asaba was oozing with rivers of blood. These trigger-happy vermins massacred Asaba. Indeed, my family lost its head. On the same day, we lost our eldest brother. There were some families who lost everybody. And therefore, those families are extinct. Damn it, man. On the 7th of October, my family did everything to prevent them from killing my brother at the killing location by the present Delta Line offices. They had customarily separated the men from the women. The women and the children in my family refused to let go of my elder brother. My brother escaped the bullet at that point. When he was eventually shot with my father, my family could not help them. Those soldiers armed with koboko, horsewhips, and rifles had forced the children and the women to leave the famous Ogbosowa Square. The following day, I confronted Ifeanyi Urayi. He had escaped under piles of dead bodies. Dr. Urayi, who was in the unfortunate company that was old enough to die, sensed my mission, still visibly shaken after watching the shooting of his father and two brothers, pointed to the Osowa killing ground and directed me to go find my people on that awesome mountain of corpses. The site was Hiroshima, burnt out hairs, sticking body parts, protruding limbs from shallow graves. Like Golgotha, the main cemetery stood out of intertwining mountain ridges of decomposing bodies. And earth-moving equipment had hurriedly tried to cover up the mayhem with red sand. From Ogbosowa, Asaba was sacked in stages, mainly by a group of soldiers led by Captains Broderick Idaosa and Lieutenant Egbinosun. Even after the cream of the Federal Army felt that enough harm had been done to the civilian populace, these brigands would deliberately initiate or mimic the Biafran style of shooting and report that the Biafrans were around. Cautious federal officers would order mopping up operations. Usually, the mopping up operations would mean further civilian casualties. Hence, this group of officers and men, mainly of Midwestern origin, were still on the rampage by the 8th of October and succeeded in getting Mr. Goodluck Oyobi shot in the thigh. Mr. Oyobi took to his heels. True to his name, he survived and later went back to the civil service, which he headed until his retirement in 1986. He was actually buried, and the federal troops that returned to ensure his death were shown his grave of plantain stubs by his mother. However, Oyobi's cousin, a communications engineer, Stephen Adigu, adorned with the same with the same silvery hair, was the man the pursuing soldiers mistook for playing Goodluck, who, on running into his grandfather's house, screamed that the soldiers have killed me, and immediately leaped into the backyard and made himself scarce. But his surprised cousin, who was visiting from Lagos and was discussing with his grandfather at the sitting room, was not that lucky. He paid the supreme price as the marauding soldiers sprayed him with bullets and his grandfather and set the family house at Umueze on fire. One of the greatest tragedies of this Holocaust was the case of Mr. L.G. Guam, former National Director of the Archives, whose pioneering historical documentation of the Nigerian cultural evolution has been noted by scholars. Mr. Guam never believed in the disintegration of the Federation. On the 7th of October, after the carnage, Mr. Guam's body was buried with his hand protruding above a shallow grave. All those artifacts and historical documents were destroyed or carted away from the family home. On the whole, thousands of young men and pensioners, 415 seminarians, and other prominent citizens such as E.C. Phillips lost their lives in the apocalyptic drama of this dance of death. The magnitude of this carnage will await the verdict of history. It is inaccurate and shameful for this tragedy to be dismissively described as an unfortunate event involving some 50 civilians. Troops of 8th Brigade moving to the crossing point carried away for execution those civilians whom they suspected to be spying on behalf of the rebels after the federal troops had suffered heavy casualties from the surprise attack by the rebels. At another village, Ogbelu, in Umonaje quarters, the inhabitants and their traditional head, the Diopa, were gathered in an emergency meeting. Before the meeting rose, the villagers were surrounded by soldiers who slaughtered them at the village meeting square. Diopa Okonji Ugo, who apparently was spared because of his age, looked around and called on the soldiers to do him one more favor. He demanded that they should complete their murderous assignments. By my customs and traditions, the people lying on the ground are answerable to me, and I feed them from that exercise of authority over them. I call them out for this meeting. Having wiped them out, life has no meaning to me any longer. He said to the soldiers. The soldiers obliged him, and like Leonidas of the Greek mythology, Diopa fell in bloody solidarity with his people. Wow. So the burial of the chiefs. Among the Indian Hindus, the burial of the blue blood is as revered as the crowning of a Roman emperor. The body is laid on an adulated inferno and burned to ashes. These cremated ashes are gathered and scattered onto the Indian Ocean. Among the Tibetans, another Asian community very close to China, burial rites are bizarre. The dead man is cut to pieces and taken to the top reaches of the mountains. The Muslims do not waste a second on their dead. Stripped naked and wrapped in mats, the dead is buried immediately. Among the Asaba people, the day you bury your dead is the day you bury yourself. Burial ceremonies in Asaba are the greatest traditional tributes that have survived its dynamic culture and civilization. Unlike the Igbos of the East, where the celebration of a young man's marriage is the ultimate, Asaba traditional burial rites are a kaleidoscopic picture of Africa's remaining magical ode on dance performance, spiritual communications, and native ritualistic showmanship. It was a paradox that the procession that preceded the dance of death had all the paraphernalia of a traditional burial celebration. The song of the spirits, native music, pure white and woven Asaba traditional dresses, beads, and oxtails, etc., were on the display line, with the dead stacked up in piles, waiting to be buried. There was nobody to accord them their normal traditional rites. The soldiers who committed the carnage were in different stages of stress and catharsis. The men were either dead or on the run. Many women who had successfully camouflaged themselves as elderly grandmothers were now assured that the best thing was to remain underground. The first waves of killing produced so many bodies that their disposal presented gruesome logistical problems. Some bodies were simply hauled into the roadside narrow ditches. Others were thrown into the river Niger. And because of the absence of men to bury the numerous dead bodies all over the town, the Niger became the most expedient cemetery for these civilian casualties. Also, receiving the bodies of those regularly killed in the John Oates and Marina beaches, the Niger was turning crimson red. There was more blood on the Niger. Mr. Okonkwo of Ogbeosowa village remembers that on the 7th of October, in his word, he said, there was a lot of movement and people were chanting, "One Nigeria." I remained in my house. Later, some soldiers wanted us to join the procession. When I spoke Hausa to them, they asked me to return to my house. Later, I mean, it's pretty much like a majority of those who carried out this genocide in Asaba, majority of them are from the northern Nigeria. You know, with a mixture of some who are like the, Igbo soldiers, Yoruba soldiers, Yoruba soldiers, Ijo soldiers, Benin soldiers from the Midwestern part and all that. But majority of them seems to be from the north. And the ability to speak Hausa seems to be a thing that saved some people. That they were able to speak Hausa to them, and yeah, they just be like, you know what? Hey, you, go back to your house. Or, hey, you, run. Oh. So do you understand that? That's the significance of that? This is the reason why they strongly believes that the Igbos must not be allowed to rule Nigeria. Because you see most of these northern soldiers who carried out this genocide, some of them are dead now, some of them are very old. They have already passed on the mantle of this, fear. Let me finish this. I'll say that before I round up. Let me finish this. So later, when the killing was over, everywhere was stinking. I was afraid I would die of an epidemic. Later, the soldiers returned and assembled few of us at the killing ground at Ogbeosowa. The sight was horrible. I remember identifying the chiefs, that is, obese, because they were wearing rings of white robes around their ankles. This is the symbol that marks out these chiefs from the ordinary titled men. In total respect for the tradition of the land and in accordance with the last rites accorded to an Obi, we collected the remains of the obese and buried them together in one large grave. They have to be separated from the others. We then dug mass graves for the others, but their swollen, dismembered bodies put their swollen, dismembered bodies into those graves. I was unable to sleep quite well for many days. I was always having nightmares of those corpses. When Moses Okocha, a young man sitting safely at home, heard about Obi Okeleke's death, he was shocked. Later, the women returned with more gory details. When they left, Moses looked for some ropes and hanged himself. Some people who anticipated this treatment from federal troops ran to the east or escaped to the surrounding villages. police inspector, Onye Menem, was a Nigerian civil servant who did not forget his responsibility to his government, even though he was on the run. On the fateful day, October 7th, when he decided to leave town, he made sure that he took inventory of the police property at the station. He brought out £1,000 in the police safe and dismissed the other ranks. On getting home, he constructed an emergency safe for this public money and deposited the amount at the corner of his house. The day he ran away to Onitsha with his family and other families clinging to the police Land Rover, he did not consider the £1,000 as his own money. Whenever he returned, the money would be passed to the appropriate police authority. When he returned 30 months later, the emergency safe in the corner of his house was still there, but his house was in smoldering ruins and the £1,000 had been burned to visible ashes. Now, I have here the list of the Asaba victims, their names. Here you get. Well, I will read that another time because of our time. So they have this here. Let me show you. So the names of the Asaba victims. So those are the names put forward by, just keeping records of the people killed. And you know what the report says? The report said that everything you hear about Asaba, the Nigerian army said is not true. They said only 50 people, some 50 people died. That is the official report. The official reports of that massacre did not say they killed thousands of people. It said that, there's some skirmishes, but it wasn't that bad. It's only about 50 people that died. Nigeria is not a real place. But hey, talking about the Hausa soldiers or the Fulani soldiers that participated in that genocide, the reason why they would never want, one of the reasons why they don't want any Igbos to rule Nigeria is that there's a fear, there's this fear of the Igbos that if the Igbos have power, like if they control power in Nigeria, there's a chance that they will retaliate what they did to them. Do you get that now? Like the Igbos will use the same Nigerian power to stage another genocide attack on the north. And it is out of fear of what they did. You see all this hatred that you are seeing flying left, right, and center in Nigeria, which is political. Right? As much as it is like, it doesn't make any sense. But if you pay attention very well, you will realize that majority of this hatred actually boils down to the fear of the unknown by this Fulani North and Hausas. That we use the opportunity. You get what I mean? Like they used the opportunity that they were in charge of. They were in charge of Nigerian power for a long time to try to exterminate the Igbos from Nigeria. It is a long time held hatred, though, and the person behind that such hatred is no other than that mofo called Ahmadu Bello. Ahmadu Bello openly, right, made the Igbos a target in northern Nigeria. For real. And you see this, their politics of the First Republic as well. There were times that they were actually, they will wake up, right? Politicians, they will wake up and they will begin the campaigns against the Igbos in the north. And then the next thing, you go to see massacre, like, left, right, and center attacks on anything Igbo. And this is historically, since 1944, up to the time that Ahmadu Bello and the rest of them emerged as the political leaders of that Arewa North. There is evidence of all of this, so I'm not making it up. Evidence there. So it was more or less like there's this fear of if the Igbos should gain power in Nigeria and decide to do what we did to them. I don't know how kind of like how believable this fear is, even though they don't really profess it openly. But I still believe that it is always there. They believe that because of what they have done or tried to do, but they didn't succeed. So if the Igbos should gain power in Nigeria, use the Nigerian system, right, to trigger something that will kind of like lead to a genocide of the North, that they won't survive it. That's why they continue to spread that hatred of the Igbos will never rule Nigeria. And they won't let them go as well. There's a reason why we must read our history. We all need to read it. No matter how it makes you feel, right? When you look at those we call our ancestors, right? They were not all saints, as much as they were not all evil as well. When you look at what they did in their time, you realize that they are what brought us to this level. So if there's anything you have to learn from history, it's never to repeat the same mistake made by these men, because they were just men. They were just human beings like me and you, who out of their own selfish, personal, political interest, took decisions that saw the death of millions of people. The political idea or the political ideology that is never to unite the people, all for political interest, personal interest, tribal interest, ethnic interest, religious interest, the interest of individuals, not the interest of the humanity. We shall continue again later. Thank you so much for your time, and you all have a good afternoon. Okay.
Maiyegun làwa mọ̀ làmọ̀ tó dòdòdò.
Maiyegun diary, Maiyegun number one.
Maiyegun làwa mọ̀ làmọ̀ tó dòdòdò.
Maiyegun diary, Maiyegun number one.
Maiyegun ti dé o, ọ̀rẹ́ ará ìlú.
Maiyegun diary, Maiyegun number one.
Lórí Facebook, lórí YouTube.
Maiyegun diary, Maiyegun number one.
Gbogbo bó ṣe ń lọ ni Maiyegun já wa sí.
Maiyegun diary, Maiyegun number one.
Àṣírí ọ̀jẹ̀lú kì í bò níbẹ̀ o.
Maiyegun diary, Maiyegun number one.
Bó bá ṣe eré, àní Maiyegun máa wí.
Maiyegun diary, Maiyegun number one.
Ó sì tún ṣe eré, wàá gbọ́ níbẹ̀ o.
Maiyegun diary, Maiyegun number one.
Maiyegun diary, diary politico.
Maiyegun diary, Maiyegun number one.
Godfatherism kò sí lọ́rọ̀ Maiyegun.
Maiyegun diary, Maiyegun number one.
Ẹ farabalẹ̀ sẹ́ o, kẹgọ́rọ̀ lẹ́nu o.
Maiyegun diary, Maiyegun number one.
Àní Maiyegun làwa mọ̀ tó dòdòdò.
Maiyegun diary, Maiyegun number one.
Àní ẹ̀sùn ràkì.
Maiyegun ti dé. Maiyegun ti dé.
Ọ̀jẹ̀lú ẹ̀sùn ràkì.
Maiyegun ti dé.
Àní ẹ̀sùn ràkì.
Maiyegun ti dé.
Lórí Facebook.
Maiyegun ti dé.
Àní ẹ̀sùn ràkì.
Maiyegun ti dé.
Lórí YouTube.
Maiyegun ti dé.
Àní ẹ̀sùn ràkì. bàbá gbé wúrẹ́.
Maiyegun máa wí.
Àní ẹ̀sùn àjò.
Maiyegun ti dé.
Ijó ìgbádìyẹ.
Maiyegun máa wí.
Àní ẹ̀sùn àjò.
Maiyegun ti dé.
Pẹ̀sìdó bá rúfin o.
Maiyegun máa wí.
Àní ẹ̀sùn àjò.
Maiyegun ti dé.
Kí gómìnà kówó jẹ.
Maiyegun máa wí.
Àní ẹ̀sùn àjò.
Maiyegun ti dé.
Ọlọ́pàá tí ń darí bá.
Maiyegun máa wí.
Àní ẹ̀sùn àjò.
Maiyegun ti dé.
Aṣòfin tí ń rúfin o.
Maiyegun máa wí.
Àní ẹ̀sùn àjò.
Maiyegun ti dé.
Òpùrọ́ olóṣèlú.
Maiyegun máa wí.
Àní ẹ̀sùn àjò.
Maiyegun ti dé.
Ọ̀jẹ̀lú ẹ̀sùn ràgì.
Maiyegun ti dé.
Àní ẹ̀sùn ràgì.
Maiyegun ti dé.
Maiyegun ti dé. Gbogbo ọ̀jẹ̀lú ẹ̀sùn ràgì. Maiyegun ti dé. Gbogbo ọ̀jẹ̀lú ẹ̀sùn ràgì. Ṣùgbọ́n ní bá ti ṣe èyí tó yẹ kí wọ́n ṣe, ọmọ bá dèrò ní fi wọ́n níran o.
Maiyegun ti dé. Gbogbo ọ̀jẹ̀lú ẹ̀sùn ràgì. Maiyegun ti dé. Gbogbo ọ̀jẹ̀lú ẹ̀sùn ràgì. Ṣùgbọ́n ní bá ti ṣe èyí tó yẹ kí wọ́n ṣe, ọmọ bá dèrò ní fi wọ́n níran.
Wọ́n fowó bẹ́ẹ̀ o, Maiyegun ó sọ pé wọ́n ò bẹ́ẹ̀. Wọ́n fowó bẹ́ẹ̀, Maiyegun ó sọ pé wọ́n ò bẹ́ẹ̀. Oníkan ṣáàtì ṣe èyí tó yẹ kí wọ́n ṣe, fáwọn ará ìlú tó gbé wọn débẹ̀ o.
Maiyegun ti dé. Gbogbo ọ̀jẹ̀lú ẹ̀sùn ràgì. Maiyegun ti dé. Gbogbo ọ̀jẹ̀lú ẹ̀sùn ràgì. Ṣùgbọ́n ní bá ti ṣe yìí tó yẹ kí wọ́n ṣe, ọmọ bá dẹ́rọ̀ ò ní fi wọ́n níran.
Ha! Kì máa yí ṣeré, ọ̀rọ̀ yìí kì í ṣẹ̀fẹ̀. Kì máa yí ṣeré, ọ̀rọ̀ yìí kì í ṣẹ̀fẹ̀. Ẹni bá ti lè lẹ́bọ̀ lẹ́rù o, ọmọ bá dèrò kàṣà ìtú wọn síta.
Maiyegun ti dé. Gbogbo ọ̀jẹ̀lú ẹ̀sùn ràgì. Maiyegun ti dé. Gbogbo ọ̀jẹ̀lú ẹ̀sùn ràgì. Ṣùgbọ́n ní bá ti ṣe yìí tó yẹ kí wọ́n ṣe, ọmọ bá dẹ́rọ̀ ò ní fi wọ́n níran.
Tẹnitẹni ọmọ Maiyegun ọ̀rẹ́ ara ìlú mọ̀mọ́ ni mo fọlọ́run ṣọ́ ẹ̀ bá kìlẹ́bù. Lóòótọ́ olódodo ìlú ọ̀tá ìlú mọ̀mọ́ ni ìwọ ṣá máa ń ṣọ́ra kò sì mọ́ bẹ̀rù. Bọ́tà ń lérí bóníṣègùn lé káwọn mọ̀mọ́ fi ṣera wọn ni ó ti dẹrùn tí wọn ò gbọ́dọ̀ sì mọ́ bẹ̀. Èèpo ọ̀gọ̀ lọmọ bá dérò tàjẹ́ ò gbọ́dọ̀ jẹ́, ó ti dọba lórí àbínú ẹni kò sì mọ́ bùyà. Àìsíwọ̀lú ní ẹnìkẹ́ ìgbódì ẹyin lábàrá o, ó kó ẹni tó bá dán o àkàmù. Maiyegun ti dé. Gbogbo ọ̀jẹ̀lú ẹ̀sùn ràgì. Maiyegun ti dé. Gbogbo ọ̀jẹ̀lú ẹ̀sùn ràgì o. Ẹni bá ti ṣe yìí tó yẹ kí wọ́n ṣe, ọmọ bá dèrò òní fi wọ́n níran o.
Maiyegun ti dé. Gbogbo ọ̀jẹ̀lú ẹ̀sùn ràgì. Maiyegun ti dé. Gbogbo ọ̀jẹ̀lú ẹ̀sùn ràgì. Ṣùgbọ́n ní bá ti ṣe yìí tó yẹ kí wọ́n ṣe, ọmọ bá dẹ́rọ̀ ò ní fi wọ́n níran.